United States submarine base at Key West, Florida. A dispatch that quoted President Truman's press secretary, Charles Ross, as saying that President Truman has no knowledge of any secret project by this government that would give substance to the existence of such objects. Ross also said that both the Air Force and the Navy deny that such objects exist.
Hi.
Hi.
Up top, if you aren't on Patreon, you didn't hear me talk about this, but I apologize if I sound like shit. I apologize if you have to listen to me being nasally, worse than I usually am. I am sick again, and that fucking sucks.
Yeah. It was a little plague rat.
Yeah, dude. Ugh. You know what? No, everyone else is a plague rat. Hey, what's up? My name's Noelle, and everyone else is a plague rat. And then I am just this like poor little peasant boy with my little stale bread being like, please, do you have any change, sir? And then the fucking rats come over and the rats cough on me. And then and then you go to work and you have rat cough and then you give it to someone who then also comes and sees me again. And so then I have double rat cough, and that's it's literally everyone else but me is the problem. So that's crazy.
Yeah, you are on the front lines of getting sick. I get sick, but and I'm Chelsea, I have burning the candle at both ends-itis. That's what I get sick from, where I have 3 social activities in a weekend, and then I throw up everywhere. But I'm not, that's like technically my only thing.
It's so fucking insane.
Is I'm like, oh, people want to be around me. Just out it goes.
You know what? That's perfect. That's... You know, at this point, I'd take that.
But you know what? I show the fuck up.
Yeah,
That's
you do.
What matters at the
Way
end of the
to fight
day.
through that. Way to fight through.
Yeah. I'm crying and driving to Salt Lake.
I knew you were, dude. I knew it. I was like, she's doing laps around the parking lot because she's crying in her car.
Yeah,
but
also like looking for paid parking. Yep, and I was there a little late, but I sat front row and center, and I kept my phone in my pocket. I was paying attention. So it's all we can do sometimes.
Hear more about that on Patreon. But also on there, I kind of hint at this. And how do I want to intro this before I get into it? Okay, actually, I do know. A lot of us are feeling very helpless right now. And we are feeling like we're drowning and we can't see the light, and that it's just doom and gloom. We're very doomer brained, and it's rightfully so. It's understandable. Can't blame you. Me too. But there's something that was briefly touched on when we went to the Armed Queer event. And I was like, holy shit, you're so right. This has always been the case. There has always been some horrific atrocity in the history of the United States where people or a group of peoples are being subjugated to violence and discrimination, and laws having the actual legal system continue those. It wasn't even just people being fucking assholes and saying slurs. It was literal law of the land that was perpetrating violence against these communities and these people. And yet we are here. And when everything feels heavy and helpless, we have to take a step back and look to the past for the things and the people and the organizations and the group efforts that pushed us forward through that and got us out of it. If you were to talk to someone who was forced into the slave trade in the 1800s and brutalized mercilessly on a daily basis and watched their family be ripped from them, if you went up to them and you said, what if I told you like slavery is going to end? They would probably be like, yeah, fucking right. They probably would not believe you. And they would look around at the southern plantation and go, no way, they're not giving this shit up. And yet, we did. And of course, I say that with an asterisk, because we then had to deal with legalized segregation and ending that, which happened in our fucking parents' lifetime. May we never fucking forget. And we worked through that. And then we have, I would say modern day slavery, which is the prison industrial complex. I mean, if you want to, I know some people might have a hard time with that sentence. And if it helps you, go look up the firefighters from the prisons that worked in the California fires. Go look up those imprisoned people who are keeping you safe and doing the jobs that not even fire crews want to do. So, and then tell me that's not what's happening to them is in a form of modern slavery, even though they genuinely are like, hey, I'm happy to be helping my community. So it's transformed. But through all of that, there has always been people fighting for justice and what at the time was viewed as radical ideas, which is just being a good fucking person and doing the right thing, even when it feels like everyone is telling you it's wrong. Good people don't follow bad laws. So with that, I want to talk about someone from America's history that is not talked about often, if at all. So let's jump in a time machine and learn.
I'm hungry to learn.
We're going to take a step back in history to America in the 1700s. Owen Brown and Ruth Mills were devout Calvinist Christians, and to scratch the folds of U.S. history, Calvinism is a branch of Protestantism that emphasizes God's sovereignty and the Bible's authority. Key beliefs include predestination. I hope these are all like triggering glossary terms from like, I think it was in 7th grade, right? When we learned about like Calvinism in the early
Like
Americas.
Martin Luther.
Yeah, Martin Luther, yeah.
It's hitting for me especially because Presbyterians are technically Calvinists. So this is like kind of some of the stuff I used to learn about in church.
Hell yeah. These are when I was reading, I was like, oh, I remember like these terms. So predestination, that was a glossary term I remember I had to write the definition of, or the idea that God has already determined who will be saved and who will not, and an emphasis on hard work and moral living. Calvinists believed that living a righteous life was a way to honor God, even though it wasn't guaranteed salvation. The Browns were descendants of the Puritans, early English settlers who sought religious freedom in America. But what separated Owen and Ruth from their Puritan lineage was that last line on Calvinists. Living a righteous life was a way to honor God, even though it didn't guarantee salvation. Unlike most American Christians today, the Browns knew what God's teachings were about, that people are not property and they deserve an equal opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Period. No ifs, buts, or exceptions. Which is why the Browns found themselves in a very vocal minority of the time as staunch abolitionists, deeply opposed to slavery. Steadfast in their convictions, Owen was actively involved in the Underground Railroad, helping runaway enslaved people escape to freedom. His home in Hudson, Ohio, served as a safe house for those seeking refuge, where he and Ruth would house, clothe, and feed those who had made it to safety. Owen was a respected member of his community. He was a successful tanner and farmer, and found himself holding various leadership roles within his town. He even employed Jesse Grant, the father of Ulysses S. Grant, for a time. Owen was close to David Hudson, the namesake of Hudson, Ohio, who also fervently opposed slavery and believed in, quote, forcible resistance by the enslaved, end quote.
And just to clarify, like Owen and Ruth are white.
Yes, they are white.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Everyone is white so far.
Got it.
While the Browns had 8 children who were all anti-slavery abolitionists, there is one child within the bunch I fear with this administration will soon find his way out of the limited history books he is in. Even now, most times when you read about him, It's as a controversial and violent figure, sometimes even referenced as a terrorist. The devil on the shoulder of Abe Lincoln is the angel for U.S. history textbooks. So today, in this very timely episode, given the current climate of the United States, let's meet Owen and Ruth's fourth child, born in Torrington, Connecticut on May 9th, 1800, John Brown. John's siblings included Anna Ruth, Solomon, I think is how they want to say that. It's probably biblical, right? Maybe. Oliver Owen and Frederick, and their adopted brother Levi.
I just wanted to be Salmon.
My brain was like, and his brother Salmon.
Cute.
But I bet it's Solomon, or in my heart, it's Salmon. His paternal grandfather, Captain John Brown, fought in the Revolutionary War. His mother, Ruth Mills, was of Dutch and Welsh descent, and her father, Gideon Mills, was also a Revolutionary War officer. The family moved to Hudson, Ohio in 1805, a region that became a hotbed of abolitionism. Tragically, Ruth died in December of 1808, shortly after giving birth to a daughter who also passed. This loss deeply affected John. He respected his father's subsequent wives, Sally Root and Lucy Hinsdale, but never formed the same bond. Owen eventually fathered 16 children in total.
That's, well, less impressive for a man to do it, but that's still crazy, especially considering he sounds like a good dude who was involved in his children's lives. Imagine being involved in 16 children's lives.
You'll learn he was, when people say to big families, are you building a small army?
I hope he was.
Girl,
a little abolitionist. Love to see it.
He was. With no school beyond the elementary level in Hudson at the time, John studied at the school of Elizur Wright, father of the famous Elizur Wright III, who was a mathematician, abolitionist, and described as the United States, quote, father of life insurance. Weird, right? I guess
that is so fucking weird.
Someone had to do it. Someone had to start. Someone had to say, hey, wait a minute.
It's expensive to die, and I love my family a lot.
Yeah. What if I die? So he campaigned that life insurance companies must keep reserves and provide surrender value. So he basically just was like, hey, you guys, I know this is tough to talk about, but what if I die? And that's real. So
yeah, we love a man who looks ahead.
We do. He was ahead of his time. At the age of 12, while working away from home, driving cattle, John witnessed a man brutally beating an enslaved young boy with an iron shovel. When John asked about the reason for such harsh treatment, he was told the boy was a slave. The incident marked a turning point, igniting a lifelong commitment to the betterment of African Americans. John's childhood in Hudson also included interactions with local natives, where he learned some of their language, joined them on hunting trips, and welcomed them into his home. Which is very much appreciating the culture, not getting rid of the culture.
Yeah, and also just being radicalized against the violence that he was seeing that pushed him into other cultures.
Oh, for sure.
It's weird to think, would you trade knowing where you are now, some of the bullshit that's happened to you, knowing the person it turned you into? What a hard thing. I don't want to go through trauma, and I don't want to have a checkered past of grief and depression, but if it makes me a better person in my future, is that worth the price?
Yeah, it's interesting. And even for me personally, learning about John Brown and learning how his family was so deeply religious, and it was their understanding and comprehension of the Bible that made them abolitionists, that made them go you guys, this is literally fucking wrong. You're actually burning the hand of God by allowing slavery to happen. This is demonic shit you're doing.
And I was just about to say, I miss that we have these kind of people to look up to. But I mean, that pastor who just played in Trump and JD Vance's face at church, who was I'll read the Bible to you. And it was literally just everything you're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
But I guess we do have these people. It's just their voices aren't loud anymore.
Yeah.
And that's what sucks.
And dare I say they weren't loud then.
Not loud enough, yeah.
Yeah. At 16, John Brown left his family to pursue an education in New England, hoping to become a minister. Although he intended to attend Amherst College, chronic eye inflammation forced him to abandon his studies and return to Ohio. You might be asking yourself, like I did, what type of chronic eye inflammation? Well, in 1816, we were still using mercury, arsenic, and opium for medical treatments, so maybe any of that. But finding a reliable source about what his eye condition was is fucking impossible because they were like, I think he has ghosts in his eye. But some speculate it was pink eye, inflammation of the iris, or, as Chelsea knows, the most deadly, allergies.
You know, I will say when I got double pink eye that one time, I would have put mercury and arsenic in my eyes, knowing what I know today.
The way that you were so convinced a bird gave you double pink eye.
It was the bird.
It wasn't.
Fuck
it
you,
wasn't.
Noelle.
It wasn't.
The bird hit my fucking head, and then I got double pink eye. I got double pink eye from the fucking bird.
Where did the bird hit you?
It got stuck in my hair, and I touched it, and then I rubbed my eyes later without having washed my hands. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to think, hey, maybe the fucking bird that wasn't well enough to avoid my whole ass head in the middle of the day had something wrong with it, because it hit me so hard I thought my dad threw a brick at me. The fact that you and the medical professionals did not believe me that the bird.
No, you can't talk about your quack fucking doctors.
Well, you know what? This is why, because like I go to doctors who act and think like you, who just look at me and go, "Damn, that's crazy." And then I'm like, "Well, are you going to treat the pink eye?" And they just send me home. I have never been more upset and betrayed. I'm sitting here in the House of my Lord 2025 trying to learn and be a good ally, and you're shitting on me for my lived experience of the bird giving me fucking double pink eye, which it did. When I go and they say, is there anything you want to say before you die? I'm gonna say I got pink eye from the fucking bird hitting me in my head. There's no other way I would have gotten pink eye.
Okay, Alfred Hitchcock. Yeah, the birds. Yep, the birds.
It was the birds.
Pink eye.
It was the fucking birds.
Okay, yeah. I believe you. What was your hair looking like that a bird thought it was a nest?
Probably much like this. So just bad. I don't know.
No, your hair looks good.
Thank you.
Good right now.
But
if I was a bird, I would also try to live in it.
Yeah. Maybe it knew I was a friend of the animals at that time. And you know, everybody laughs at me every time. It fucking hurt. Yeah, I literally thought my dad threw a brick at me.
It's literally insane.
And then on top of it all, I get this bird hitting me in my head and then the double pink eye, and everyone was still like, well, what did you do to make the bird hit
What were you wearing?
I had an armful of presents because it was on Christmas Day. That's also what people fail to mention.
God.
Christmas Day. And I get just Kennedy'd by a bird.
Yeah.
Right to the back of the head. Oh my God.
Man. It's like you were taking a drive in a convertible with the top down.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, let's get back into the 1800s and not about
There were more birds then, so maybe that's what caught him.
He's allergic to birds. Back in Hudson, John taught himself land surveying, briefly worked at his father's tannery, and then established his own successful tannery outside of town with his brother Levi. While John was a great cook, he took the L on baking and hired a widow, Miss Amos Lusk, to bake for them. And as their business expanded, he persuaded her to manage his household, which is an interesting proposition to give someone. But I don't know what it was like in 1820. I'm assuming maybe that was
that's probably exactly it. She was probably just a governess.
Yeah, they were like, just, you know what, come on in.
Mm-hmm.
Miss Gluss and her daughter, Dianeth, moved into the cabin, and in 1820, John married Dianeth, who he described as, get ready for this, remarkably plain, but neat, industrious, and economical girl of excellent character, earnest piety, and practical common sense.
That's a fucking love poem in
And
the
you-
1800s.
And you want to know
actually.
something? What is it? Is it the Bechdel test?
Uh-huh.
He never talked about her physically. He never mentioned anything about her.
Well,
Like,
I mean, remarkably plain, but
well,
that could have been her
that could have been her
personality.
personality. That's what I interpreted it as.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, but I was like,
Yeah.
wow,
Ally.
it's
And
really
you know what? It's
romantic.
another remarkably plain girl. If someone said that I was economical of excellent character, I might cry from joy.
Yeah, I think those are all really nice traits to have. So 13 months later, their first child, John Jr., was born. Over 12 years of marriage, Diana gave birth to 7 children, including Owen, the one above. Oh, we're going to talk about Owen later, JK.
Yeah, Owen was the dad, so she did not give birth to her father-in-law, but I knew what you meant.
Thanks.
Also, they only had 8 names back then,
They
and they
just
reused all of them.
recycle them. Brown possessed an intimate knowledge of the Bible, capable of identifying even minor errors in recitation, which probably made him a hit during public sermons when people were trying to preach. He didn't smoke tobacco or drink tea, coffee, or alcohol, so he was 15 years before the Mormons tried to coin that. Beyond the Bible, his favorite reading material was Parallel Lives, and he particularly enjoyed the biographies of Napoleon and Oliver Cromwell, and he believed that, quote, truly successful men possessed their own libraries. Which
I agree.
Is tea.
Put that on a shirt.
John would end up moving to Richmond Township, Pennsylvania in 1825 to better support the Underground Railroad. Over the next decade, he built a successful tannery with a hidden, ventilated shelter for escaping enslaved people. It was all a fucking ploy. Him and his dad, they were like successful tanners, but it was all a ploy to build underneath it like a safe house. He personally transported people in his wagon, concealing them among mail, hides, and surveying equipment, delivering them to safety in New York.
See, this is like the American culture we talked a little bit about on Patreon of like how punk rock Americans could be. Like, this is a punk rock thing.
Yeah.
I
big
mean,
time.
like, yeah, capitalism, I'll build my own business, but I'm also breaking the law for justice.
Yeah. And it's also so punk rock that it's literally dynasties. Like, it's generational. Like, they're all getting into it. I love that.
Yeah.
His farm became a crucial station on the Underground Railroad, reportedly aiding around 2,500 people in their journey to freedom. John also recruited others to the cause while still running his tannery, road surveying, founding a school, establishing a congregational church, and serving as postmaster. I know.
He has burning the candle at both ends.
Yeah, he does. He stuck to his moral convictions, telling white settlers who had asked him to help drive native hunters off the land that he'd sooner to help them defend it, which is, again, very cool. Despite early financial success, John struggled with debt and personal tragedy. His businesses faltered, and between 1831 and 1843, he lost several children and his first wife, Diana. And honestly, they just died, dude.
Yeah, they just died. People just died then.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's like sad.
Yeah.
But she
want to know
died as she lived. Plain and economically.
Plain and economical. You want to know what actually jumped the or ended, I should say, ended the severe mortality rate of infants and children?
Abortion.
No.
Oh.
I was going to say vaccines, but love where your head was.
Well,
it's okay.
I feel like allowing people to cater to healthy pregnancies and lifestyles also leads to a lower mortality rate, but yeah, I guess that's neither here nor there. Also vaccines.
So anyway, he remarried in 1833 and fathered 13 more children, which is insane. Also putting up dad's numbers. In an attempt to continue his work, he would move his family to Ohio, where he pursued new business ventures while continuing his Underground Railroad efforts. However, he suffered severe financial losses again in the Panic of 1837, eventually declaring bankruptcy in 1842. He was even jailed for refusing to vacate land he believed was wrongly taken from him.
It probably was.
I bet it was.
I don't believe that this man has done anything wrong in his life yet.
I don't know. He hasn't. He never will. The 1837 murder of abolitionist publisher Elijah Lovejoy.
Also, why I feel like it's important to distinguish because I keep imagining that I'm not that I'm trying to whitewash history at all. It's just I'm looking these people up and I'm surprised that at the time there were helpers, I guess. I'm thinking that all of these people had to have been slaves at one point, but I'm just saying that does not seem to be the case. Also, I looked up a photo of this man. I was like, that's a 67-year-old man, but apparently he was only 35. Oh, yeah. Touche. They lived a lot harder than.
Yeah. It was tough out there. They didn't have SPF. So, the murder of abolitionist publisher Elijah Lovejoy was a turning point for John. He publicly vowed to dedicate his life to the destruction of slavery, and his activism intensified. He and his family would get removed from their congregation because the church started practicing segregation, and the Browns invited Black members to join them in their family seating. After this, he would never join another church again. And there was like a back and forth. Like the church leaders were like, John, just like knock it off, dude. Like just fucking stop and come back. Just like you can't do that anymore. We're gonna look past it. And he basically told them to fuck themselves.
Which when I looked up Elijah Lovejoy, he was a Presbyterian pastor, that makes sense because Presbyterians are Calvinists, but it also would make sense that he died and now all of a sudden church leaders are going to have issues with
they bring in segregation
with Black people being able to join, and now that the pastor's gone, now they're going to push the issue.
Yep. John believed that he was a, quote, instrument of God raised to strike the death blow to slavery in the United States, verbatim.
Tight.
That this work of abolitionism was a sacred obligation. For the next few years, John continued to struggle financially, moving from one venture to another. This is so fucking, he's so cool. Even briefly breeding horses, but abandoned the job after learning they were being used for racing.
I love this man.
He's literally the best. Vegan coded. By the mid-1840s, he became known for his expertise in sheep farming and wool production, which eventually allowed him to move his family into a stable home. About 6 years later, they relocated to Springfield, Massachusetts, officially as a wool merchant, but more specifically, to engage in its growing abolitionist movement. He attended anti-slavery lectures by Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth, and his views became more militant as he witnessed the impact of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which called for the federal government stepping in to find and return fugitive enslaved people, rather than leave it to the states. It imposed harsher penalties for those who aided and abetted. It removed the right to trial and incentivized rats. In response, he founded the League of Gileadites. Gilead was an ancient region of Palestine, and the name comes from the story of the war between Ephraim and Gilead, as referenced in the Bible. Gilead was often associated with strength, refuge, and deliverance. Jeremiah 8:22 mentions the balm of Gilead, symbolizing salvation and relief from suffering. So he said, let me use that symbolism.
Also, I was like, Gilead was one of the Knights of the Round Table, stupid. And then I looked it up and I was indeed wrong. I think I'm thinking of Galahad. So
you tried.
I did. The wars that go on in my own head.
Dude, the way that I was like, what the fuck is a Gileadite? It took me, I was like, huh? That's got to mean something. Like when you read that, and I did like how to pronounce, and I had YouTube tell me, and I was like, what is this word?
You spelled it out phonetically in the script, and I still went, Galahad.
Yeah, you cannot look at it. You cannot look at the word. You have to look at the phonetic spelling. So, The League of Gileadites was a secret group of whites, freed black men, and runaways dedicated to protecting enslaved people from slave catchers by any means necessary. Under his leadership, Springfield became a key abolitionist stronghold, and before leaving in 1850, John instructed the League to act, quote, quickly, quietly, and efficiently to protect the people. From the League's formation onward, no one was ever forcibly returned to slavery from Springfield.
Oh yeah.
John
Epic
Brown,
metal
what?
guitar.
I know.
Insert just a guitar riff.
So
Yeah, we'll
sick.
just steal it from last podcast.
Yeah, steal that. John Brown moved his family to North Elba, New York in 1848, purchasing land from abolitionist Gerrit Smith in an area he referenced as Timbuktu, where grants were given to black farmers. John sought to support these farmers while preparing for his larger fight against slavery. He built the house that stands today, now preserved as the John Brown Farm State Historic Site. John's leanings were becoming more righteous as his belief that it was necessary to end slavery after decades of peaceful efforts had failed. John said that in working to free the enslaved, he was following Christian ethics, including the golden rule of treating others as one would want to be treated by them, and said he was also only following the Declaration of Independence, which states that all men are created equal. He said that in his view, these two principles meant the same thing. And that was a direct quote. They meant the same thing.
It's not even crazy thinking. That's like literally what those mean.
Yeah, he just knows how to read.
Yeah, the fact that people still can interpret them so incorrectly is wild.
Yeah. At the same time, the Kansas Territory was in the violent struggle later known as Bleeding Kansas. The conflict was between pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups and was a key precursor to the Civil War. In 1855, 5 of John's sons moved to Kansas to join the fight. John Brown would follow later, bringing weapons to support the Free State cause, rallying anti-slavery forces. Brown and the Free State settlers intended to bring Kansas into the Union as a slavery-free state. On May 21st, 1856, Lawrence, Kansas, a town that had been founded by anti-slavery settlers, was attacked by pro-slavery settlers, led by Douglas County Sheriff Samuel J. Jones. They attacked and ransacked the town. This would be known as the Sack of Lawrence.
You want to know what else is really important about? I shouldn't have interjected.
No, say it.
Lawrence, Kansas is also where Sam and Dean Winchester from Supernatural were born.
Really?
Yeah, so really derailed.
No, I like that.
But anyway, yeah, Lawrence, Kansas.
Well, maybe that had maybe they did that on purpose. Maybe it was like symbolism.
Yeah, that that's the center of bullshit where the fight started. Maybe.
Yeah. So they attacked and ransacked the town. This would be known as the Sack of Lawrence. It thankfully only resulted in one confirmed death, and it's very cool confirmed death. A pro-slavery raider who was killed when a collapsing building fell on him.
Sucks. Woo. Loser.
Sucks to suck. Despite being a violent attack, the pro-slavery forces mostly focused on destroying property, looting and burning buildings, including the Free State Hotel and newspaper offices.
Oh, no, they would never go for housing and media.
Right? Who would have thought? And taking all the food and water. This wasn't an act of vandalism, but a calculated attempt to crush the growing resistance to slavery and intimidate those fighting for freedom. Sorry if you heard that slurp.
Free ASMR.
I know people fucking hate that, but a pro-slavery writer, Benjamin Franklin Stringfellow, close, of the Squatter Sovereign, stupid name for a newspaper, wrote that, quote, pro-slavery forces are determined to repeal this northern invasion and make Kansas a slave state. Though our rivers should be covered with the blood of their victims, and the carcasses of the abolitionists should be so numerous in the territory as to breed disease and sickness, we will not be deterred from our purpose.
He just
And
like reminds me of like a Charlie Kirk. Like I bet he had a small little fucking face.
yeah, and I bet he had a small little fucking dick too, bitch boy.
Pick someone else's name, loser.
Dude, well, no, don't say that because like Benjamin Franklin is like not cool. That's why like a lot of people have the last name Franklin. Same
Yeah, but
with
I'm saying
Johnson Jefferson.
like get your own name
Yeah,
still.
yeah. No, you're so
Not
right.
a Benjamin. Yeah, I'll think let me think of a better thing.
Okay. Hey, did he fly the kite with the key? Was that Benjamin Franklin?
Yeah. Oh, Benny Franks.
He can go fly a kite. So anyway, John Brown decided that the fight against slavery would not be waged solely in speeches and political debates, but with steel and blood when necessary. On the night of May 24th into the morning of the 25th, 1856, he, his sons, remember the small army, and other abolitionists carried out the Potawatomi Massacre. I'm so good that I got that
I think
word.
you nailed it. Yeah,
hard.
that's how I was pronouncing it in my brain.
Yeah, it's fucking hard, dude. Executing 5 pro-slavery settlers who had helped enforce the oppression of Free State Kansas.
Good.
I know. Love to see it. Henry Clay Pot.
Do we like him or hate him? He was part of the second.
Yeah, he sucks. So it doesn't matter.
Pat.
Who was Pate? Henry Clay Pate, who was part of the sacking of Lawrence, was then hired as a deputy United States Marshal and set out with a group of 30 men to hunt John Brown down. During the hunt for John Brown, 2 of his sons, Jason and John Jr., were captured, charged with murder, jailed, and restrained. Brown and the Free State Militia gathered to confront Henry Clay. 2 of his men were captured, which led to the conflict on June 2nd, 1856, at the Battle of Blackjack. John Brown's forces defeated and captured Henry Clay and 22 of his men, proving that Free State fighters could stand against the so-called border militia from Missouri.
I'd love to see it, because at the time they were like, this woke mob. They can't, their hair's blue. Yep. And then they get...
That's what they said.
Dog walked, molly whopped.
Yeah.
They captured 22 of their men.
Yeah. And they all did it with blue hair and septum piercing. So It's like crazy. This win caused General John W. Reed to lead a force of 300 armed pro-slave Missourians in an attack on John Brown and the abolitionists of Osawatomie. The goal was to seek, destroy, and march on to Topeka and Lawrence to do the same. Unfortunately for John Brown, and for the wrath that would follow, Jesus, his son Frederick and their neighbor David Garrison were killed trying to prevent the entry of the 300 into Osawatomie. So they were like out on the outskirts. Yeah.
Hear me out. He had 30 other children to replace him.
He did. Well, at this point, I think he's down to fucking probably 10.
But what a badass Spartan death.
It literally is.
So. Way to go down like a G.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Also, when I found out they were brought 300, I was like, come on, dude. You're such
I know,
a loser.
It's when... It's when dude, you see this all the time, though. It's like when we go to the Planned Parenthood protests, which are literally a bunch of blue hair, septum piercing, they, thems, and then the Proud Boys show up with their guns. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, you're like, wow.
Fucking nerd.
Awesome. You look super fucking cool.
Want me to tell you what the female orgasm is all about? Because you've never given one in your life, you fucking nerds.
Yeah, the closest thing to touching a woman is the printout of Pam Anderson's tits they have on their gun. But anyway, outnumbered more than...
Pam Anderson is ours. They can't have her.
I know. They thought they could. Little did they know.
They get blonde beach bitch. They get the other blonde.
Yeah,
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah. God.
You have her.
Yeah, they have Marjorie Taylor Greene sticker on their fucking AK.
And Ben Shapiro's dry ass wife.
free her. So anyway, outnumbered more than 7-1, John Brown positioned his 38 men to use the terrain to their advantage. Firing from cover, they killed at least 20 and wounded 40 more. Woo,
Yeah.
yay!
Yay! You have to speak the language of the oppressor.
You
The
do.
language of the oppressor is violence.
Yeah, it's the only language they hear, see, and know.
That's the only language that they teach in the United States. People say that we're not fluent in more languages. Yes, the fuck we are.
Yeah, we are. Despite the damage, Reed regrouped and ordered his men to charge into the woods. Recognizing that they could not hold their ground against the mass amount of men, Brown's group scattered and retreated. In the escape, one of Brown's fighters was killed and 4 were captured. Brown and his remaining men hid in the surrounding forest, forced to watch as the Missourians looted and burned Osawatomie. These battles solidified John Brown as a warrior for abolition, earning him national recognition and inspiring others to take up the fight against the institution of slavery. He did not seek war, but he understood that freedom would never be granted voluntarily by those who profited from human suffering. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
According to his first biographer, James Redpath, John Brown had long envisioned this future for himself. Redpath compares him to Moses, divinely chosen to lead enslaved people into the southern states to freedom. He wrote that for 30 years, Brown had secretly cherished the idea of being the leader of a servile insurrection, the American Moses, predestined to lead the servile nations in our southern states to freedom. Others who knew Brown echoed this belief, and one friend described his conviction, saying, "As Moses was raised up and chosen of God to deliver the children of Israel out of Egyptian bondage, he was fully convinced in his own mind that he was to be the instrument in the hands of God to effect the emancipation of the slaves." Brown would say, "A few men in the right, and knowing that they are right, can overturn a mighty king. 50 men, 20 men, in the Allegheny Mountains would break slavery to pieces in 2 years." Ruined his awesome quote because I can't read. With a free state victory in the October 1857 elections, Kansas temporarily quieted.
And then they stormed the Capitol.
Yeah. And then January 6th, seizing the moment, John Brown sent his men back to Iowa, where he began hinting at his larger plan for an armed uprising in Virginia. In January 1858, Brown traveled east to meet with Frederick Douglass in Rochester, New York. There, he discussed his evolving strategy and reconsidered the criticisms his former ally, Hugh Forbes, enemy,
Fucker.
who had doubted the feasibility of his plan. Determined to provide structure for his envisioned movement, Brown drafted a provisional constitution outlining a government for the new free state he intended to establish in the Southern Mountains. Frederick Douglass would tell him it was a suicide mission. Despite this, Brown remained steadfast in his belief that divine justice would ultimately triumph over slavery, no matter the cost. Sorry, I'm going to slurp again.
Imagine, like, if these people would have been more prevalent in their victories, like what America could have been right now. Because we already know that the South wasn't ever established as like a sovereign state from the, we already know what happened there. But man, it would have been cool if he would have succeeded.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how the history of the United States is depicted and shared and taught.
And it's also like we can look back and be like, damn, what if he would have won all of his like fights? But then like, damn, what would have happened if he would have just stayed home one day or been like, not my problem?
Yeah.
Like then it could have been so much worse. So it is inspiring in that aspect because I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever have this type of fucking impact. But what did he do? He just stood up for what he thought was right. So
Yeah.
We can all do that.
Absolutely.
I'm inspired, Noelle.
You should be. From Rochester, Brown continued his journey, meeting with influential abolitionists in Peterborough, New York, and Boston, where he conferred with the Secret Six: Franklin, Sanborn, Samuel Howe, George Stearns, Garrett Smith, Theodore Parker, and Thomas Higginson, which was a network of wealthy Northern supporters. And they were like under wraps funding abolitionist movements. In letters to them, he emphasized his intent to lead recruits armed and ready to bring Kansas work into the South, a reference to the violent resistance he had waged in Bleeding Kansas. In May 1858, John Brown and 12 of his followers, including his son Owen, traveled to Chatham, Ontario, Canada.
Sure.
Whatever. It's Canada, girl. Do you think
Canada.
they fucking teach us about that? For the Constitutional Convention on May 10th.
Shout out. My sister's birthdays.
Shout
Taurus.
out. Big day. Big day in history.
It was also D-Day.
Whoa. Literally.
Mm-hmm.
Damn. Well, the event, attended by several dozen delegates, was organized by Dr. Martin Delaney and James Madison Bell. Chatham, we'll never know, a town of 6,000 residents, was home to a significant population of enslaved people who had escaped to freedom, and it was here that Brown met Harriet Tubman, who played a crucial role in helping him recruit for his cause. At the convention, the delegates, 34 black and 12 white, adopted Brown's provisional constitution. With funding and support growing in preparing for the Harpers Ferry raid he was planning, John raised money to finance the production of firearms in Connecticut. Black abolitionist Mary Ellen Pleasant contributed $30,000, equivalent to $980,000 today.
That's crazy.
I know. And John continued to move through the Underground Railroad to preach his cause and need for contributions. Among his backers was abolitionist Chaplain Fotis Fisk, who provided another sizable donation in trade for Brown's autograph, a relic he would later gift to the Kansas Historical Society.
Aw,
which is
I love
very
that.
fucking cool. Despite nearly all delegates signing, a few volunteered for his forces. A security leak caused by friend turned foe turned
Fucking
enemy.
rat.
Yep. Hugh
Bootlicking
Forbes
rat.
revealed plans to Senator Henry Wilson. This had them delay the raid and caused Brown to lose contact with Canadian supporters. The Secret Six were divided. Howe and Higginson wanted no delays, while Stearns and Smith, who controlled funding, called for a postponement, afraid of their names being revealed. To throw Forbes off and regain control, Brown returned to Kansas in June 1859, buying time to regroup for the Harpers Ferry raid. As Brown moved forward with his plans, he took steps to alter his appearance, growing a beard to disguise himself, and he laid low. In January 1858, Brown and his men gathered at Springdale, Iowa, a Quaker settlement, to prepare for his raid. At Kennedy Farmhouse near Harpers Ferry, John Brown and his followers, including veterans from the Kansas raids and newly recruited men, prepared for the attack, and Brown's daughters and their families helped prepare food for the men. Again, the army,
Family.
the generations.
Yeah, family effort.
They said community, girl.
Mm-hmm.
The raid began on October 16th, 1859, with the goal of seizing the armory and arsenal, liberating enslaved people, and advancing the abolitionist cause. Initially, Brown's men faced no resistance, capturing the armory and taking hostages, including, Colonel Lewis Washington? Yeah, a descendant of George Washington, the actual one.
Cool.
However, after halting a train, Brown made what would be a critical error in allowing it to continue. And from that, a telegraph was sent to authorities alerting them of the raid. By October 18th, my birthday.
Nice.
Just history.
Birthdays in this.
Big history birthdays. John and his men were surrounded by U.S. Marines, led by historic American piece of shit, Robert E. Lee, and Jeb Stuart. So, literal demons.
Hate them. Glad they're dead.
Glad. Couldn't have happened to worse guys. But John Brown refused to surrender, saying, "No, I prefer to die here," which is slay.
Mm-hmm.
Stuart then gave a signal, and the Marines used sledgehammers and a makeshift battering ram to get to John and his men. In a violent capture, Brown and his surviving men were taken captive. John Brown was also, it was like 5 minutes, that fight. Crazy. John Brown was charged with treason and tried in a Virginia state court at the request of Governor Wise. The charge was treason against Virginia, and President Buchanan did not object to the decision. The trial was framed more as a political statement than a legal one. By trying Brown in Virginia, the focus shifted to Virginia rather than the United States, making Brown's actions a direct affront to the Commonwealth and, by extension, to the Southern slaveholding system. This contributed to the growing divide between the North and the South. Brown, along with the surviving John Anthony Copeland, Barclay Coppock, Shields Green, and Aaron Dwight Stevens, were charged with murder, conspiracy to incite a slave insurrection, and treason. After a week-long trial in Charlestown, Jefferson County, and only 45 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Brown guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to be publicly hanged on December 2nd, 1859. John Brown would become the first person in U.S. history to be executed for treason. Before his conviction, John Brown was denied access to reporters as both the judge and Andrew Hunter feared that his words, if published, would intensify tensions, especially among the enslaved population. This restriction pissed Brown off, obviously, who expressed his desire to publicly share his motives and intentions through the press. However, once convicted, the ban was lifted, and John engaged with reporters and anyone who wished to see him, with the exception of pro-slavery clergy.
Yeah, fuck him.
Straight up. During this time, John Brown received more letters than ever before. He wrote countless responses, composing hundreds of articulate letters, many of which were later published in newspapers. The town became flooded with troops and militias, at times numbering in the hundreds or even thousands. Brown's movements, whether from the jail, the courthouse, or to the gallows, were heavily guarded. There were plans to rescue John. Virginia Governor Henry A. Wise would write in fear to President Buchanan, and the area was placed under martial law, with military orders for the execution day listing 14 specific points. But John repeatedly stated that he did not want to be rescued. He even had a friend, Silas Soule, infiltrate the jail by getting himself arrested for drunken brawling and offered to break him out and flee north to New York State and possibly Canada, which
So fucking rock and roll, man.
Such a great friend. But Brown, at 59 years old, told him that he was too old to live a fugitive life and preferred to face execution for the abolitionist cause. Even from exile, Victor Hugo tried to get a pardon for John, publishing an open letter on December 2nd, 1859, that warned of the consequences of Brown's execution. He wrote, do you want to read this?
Sorry, I'm just looking at Victor Hugo. He wrote something famous.
Yeah.
The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Les Mis.
Pretty famous, I'd say.
Yeah. So, politically speaking, the murder of John Brown would be an uncorrectable sin. It would create in the Union a latent fissure that would, in the long run, dislocate it. Brown's agony might perhaps consolidate slavery in Virginia, but it would certainly shake the whole American democracy. You save your shame, but you kill your glory. Morally speaking, it seems a part of the human light would put itself out, that the very notion of justice and injustice would hide itself in darkness on that day where one would see the assassination of emancipation of liberty itself.
Big words.
Man was a poet.
Yeah, he was. And going back to John Brown here, writing to his wife and children from jail, John said, quote, "My blood will do vastly more towards advancing the cause I have earnestly endeavored to promote than all I have done in my life before. It was worth inconceivably more to hang than for any other purpose," which is fucking baller, dude.
Yeah.
Staring down the face of a gun/noose and being like, Can't wait. On December 1st, 1859, Marianne Brown, which is his third wife, who had been kept away from her husband, was granted permission to visit John before his execution the following day. December 2nd, 1859, John spent time reading his Bible and wrote a final letter to his wife, which included the will he had prepared the day before. Before his execution, Brown, aware that the last words of prominent people were often valued, he gave this. Do you want to be John Brown's final words?
Yeah. I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed, it might be done.
Isn't that fucking badass?
Dude, copy paste.
He really said, let me cook.
Yeah.
So
he's like, oh, you want me to move mountains? Okay, let's do it. You want me to inspire?
Sick. So sick. At 11 a.m., John was transported from the county jail to a small field a few blocks away for the hanging. He sat on his coffin in a wagon, surrounded by a crowd of 2,000 soldiers prepared for any possible attack. The military presence was described as the, quote, greatest array of disciplined forces ever seen in Virginia. Among the soldiers were future Confederate General Stonewall Jackson and John Wilkes Booth, who had borrowed a militia uniform to gain access to the execution.
Man, he was just everywhere.
Dude, I bet if you just like look through old photos, you see John Wilkes Booth in the background everywhere.
Everywhere.
As Brown walked to the gallows, he exhibited, quote, the most complete fearlessness and insensibility to danger and death, end quote. At 11:15 a.m., Brown was hanged, and 35 minutes later, he was pronounced dead by the coroner. The poet Walt Whitman later described viewing the execution in Years of Meteors, which it's very long, but definitely go read it. It's all about how he was profoundly changed by John Brown. John Brown had expressed a desire for his body to be burned, with the ashes placed in an urn, and for his deceased sons to be given the same. His epitaph was to read, I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept my faith. 2 Timothy 4:7. However, due to Virginia law and his wife's wishes, his body was placed in a wooden coffin with the noose still around the neck and sent by train to his family's homestead in North Elba, New York for burial. Upon arriving in Philadelphia on December 3rd, Mayor Alexander Henry and police met the train, declaring that public order could not be maintained if the casket remained in the city. A decoy casket, covered with flowers and flags, was displayed for the crowd, while the real casket was sent on immediately. Which is so fucking cool to know that, like, he was having the hero's funeral.
Yeah.
Even though, like, his body was, being moved elsewhere, the fact that they had to do this because they knew that, like, if they brought military presence, it would just cause more shit. They just had to give, like, the people their chance to mourn him. So fucking cool. Very V for Vendetta.
Yeah, I was just thinking this is, like, giving the same vibes.
Yep. The journey continued through towns that were significant to Brown's life. And he even, like, they took a boat journey with his body. It was, like, on a lake that he went to a lot. It was cool. Brown's body arrived at his farm in North Elba on December 8th, 1859, where he was washed, dressed, and placed in a 5-foot 10-inch walnut coffin. His funeral was attended by abolitionist Reverend Joshua Young, with speeches from James Miller McKim and Wendell Phillips. In the north, memorial services were held, with church bells ringing and minute guns fired, with prominent transcendental writers and friends, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, praising Brown's legacy.
Dude, I can't believe I didn't learn about this dude.
I know, he was friends with everyone. It's crazy. Well, he's considered
crazy
an American terrorist. He's a domestic terrorist. It
almost reminds me of, like, the West Memphis 3, where, like, all of these figures were coming out, and, like, the artists and the writers and the poets of being like, hey, something's up here, and, like, failed this dude, but I mean, at least he got his praises.
And he didn't even want it. He just wanted people to be
burned.
Yep. And I will also say that when reading this and like all the people who he was in contact with and like his inner circle, it reminds me of like where we're at today. Or like if you need to like take yourself out for a second and look at things objectively and say, am I actually on the right side if the artists,
Hmm.
singers, musicians, poets, writers, doctors, scientists, mathematicians, economists, philanthropists, sociologists, psychologists, all of these people are on the other side, and you
Yeah.
find yourself opposite of that. I think you have to just take a moment of mindfulness and
Hmm.
separate yourself and be like, wait, is this actually,
Self-reflection.
yeah, like, is this actually the right
Yeah.
side? So on July 4th, 1860, a memorial gathering took place at Brown's farm, marking the last time his surviving family members would gather. A majority of them went west.
Okay.
Some of them went north, some of them went west.
Which is still part of the North. So,
Yeah. John Brown's raid on Harpers Ferry marked one of the final events that helped lead to the American Civil War. Southern Democrats blamed Brown's raid on the political platform of the Republican Party. Remember, back then they were flipped,
mhm.
particularly as the 1860 election approached. In response, Republicans, Democrats, distanced themselves from John Brown, condemning his actions and labeling him as an extremist. And this way,
Cowards.
I know, they always happen. In this way, Brown's raid deepened the sectional divide, contributing to the polarization that ultimately split the Democratic Party and the nation.
Dude, he's like a little Luigi.
Sure was, dude.
Hmm. Just out there fighting the good fight. And then people are too scared to admit that that's what we've come to.
Yep,
Like, we need this type of activism right now.
we always have. To many abolitionists in the North, however, Brown became a martyr, sacrificed for the cause of ending slavery. While figures like William Lloyd Garrison initially condemned the raid as misguided, they defended Brown's integrity and principles, asserting that those who supported American revolutionary ideals could not logically oppose his actions. Frederick Douglass, who admired Brown's unwavering commitment, reflected on the stark contrast between their approaches, recognizing that while both fought for freedom, Brown's willingness to sacrifice his life for the cause was unparalleled. Ultimately, Brown's raid, though unsuccessful, left a mark on the nation's consciousness, further fueling the tensions that would soon lead to civil war. The Civil War ended in 1865, with the abolitionist Union North victorious, but it took another 90 years before issues like segregation and Jim Crow laws were seriously challenged during the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, leading to their legal dismantling. While progress was made, it took 90 years from the end of the Civil War to reach legal milestones like the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. Radical inequality and the effects of these laws still persist in many aspects of American life today. Now, in 2025, 71 years after the wins of the civil rights movement, the country stands at another violent crossroads, divided by imaginary borders, skin color, and identity.
Damn.
And that's John Brown, girl.
And this time the fight's in bathrooms and at the border.
Yep.
Fight of the bees.
Yep.
Double B cup. You think they're talking about me? Hey.
Hey, same here, girl. But yeah, so that is John Brown. And for those who love Hassan Piker as much as I do, that's where the John Brown Hunting Club merch comes from. It's like a
Okay.
camo, like Realtree's camo, and it says John Brown Hunting Club, and it's a reference to killing fucking Confederates and
I love
pro-slave
that.
losers. So,
I would love to have a shirt like that. I will
Yep.
have to go support.
so yeah, that is that. That's a little bit of American history that American history doesn't like to tell. And this is my friendly reminder to everyone listening to take the time and put in the effort and passion and love into learning about the people's history, I would say. And especially that we are in Black History Month, I would say take special time to learn about the Black struggle because they have always faced this type of pressure and discrimination and legal fucking wars against them. And even in today's society where the government likes to pretend racism doesn't exist, they still have, obviously, these embedded into the culture struggles. And if you want to know how to put your efforts into something, you should look to Black revolutionary groups for inspiration because they've
one thing
always done it.
we've liked to say to the other side a lot is like those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. But that's like for us too, because like this guy is someone that we can learn from. I mean, he was such a like I know the raid and whatever, like the violence of that, but whatever, fuck it. Sometimes you got to push back, but also just educating his children to not be hateful and educating his children to give a shit and also giving a shit and showing up and being educated and being in places where it wasn't just a slew of white voices at the time. Learning from that energy and standing 10 toes down. Love to see it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the biggest revolutionary acts John Brown did wasn't even in the violence, but it was in standing in spaces and demanding the space to be shared. And I think that is something that everyone can learn from and enable in their life as an act of revolutionary change. So,
yep. Good job. Good episode.
That's that. And if you want to know more about that, you can go to the link tree in all of our bios because there we have links to actually, first of all, to get there, we're at Go to Hell Podcast. I am at Noelle Fain. That is at Sith Lord. When you get in there and you click that link tree, which hopefully is fixed. Did we look? It was working when I clicked it. So I don't know what your experience was.
I don't know.
You can find a link to our merch, which we have new designs up. We have the super fucking sick Saints design that Kelly did, Kelly Holoran, or at Wildwood Owl on Etsy. Her link is also in there. But we have that merch, which is super fucking sick. We have the transphobes eat shit and die, which is very fucking cool. And a reminder that 100% of all proceeds are donated. You can also find a link to our Discord, which we're in, we're hanging out, we're talking. Say hi to us. I'm in there. What are you guys doing? I'm in there. So we also have a link to our Patreon. $1 gets you in. Big political episode today. Not really political, honestly. It's more of like, what do we do now type episode. What have we learned? Where do we need to go? What do we still need to learn? We also have links to AFSC Palestine, where you can learn how to help the people in Gaza, both financially and just with solidarity. We have a link to our YouTube, so talk shit to us there. And I don't know why you'd need it, but a place to listen to us, which is anywhere podcasts are heard.
Hell yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and give a massive hail to John Brown and I would say like the legacy of love and compassion and humanism, because it, I don't know, to instill such fantastic traits of equality and I don't know, in a time like that to your children and then their generations, so on and so forth. That's how you have fundamental change in the world, and that's how you make your mark. Everyone is so afraid of like not having a legacy, right? And like that's why sometimes people want to have kids. This is it, and you don't have to have children to do that. You can just spread the knowledge of equality and love and to anyone who will listen and even people who won't listen. So that's my hail to him.
Yeah, I'm going to say hail daddy energy because that's daddy energy. The other day, Oliver asked me, he goes, does that guy have daddy energy? And I went, nah, he's just hot. And he was like, is there a difference? And I said, yes.
There's a big difference.
That's this guy, John Brown, daddy energy.
Big time.
So
big time. Well, let's get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Hell's Gate is a supernatural roller derby comic book series dripping of blood, demons, and glitter. Saya is a fresh meat skater with a dangerous crush on her favorite derby player. Desperate to be accepted, she attempts to cast a magic spell in hopes of winning her idol's admiration, but instead unleashes a demonic possession that seeks to destroy her and her team at that night's Halloween game. The first issue is out now. Visit hellsgate.com to get your limited edition copy today.